They ignored me for years, so I made them pay dearly in the end. You know that feeling when you're invisible? Not the superhero kind where you can sneak around and fight crime, but the soul-crushing kind where you're standing right there, speaking, breathing, existing, and nobody sees you. That was my life for 8 years. 8 long, suffocating years where I might as well have been a ghost, haunting my own existence. My name is Sarah. And this is the story of how I went from being the most overlooked person in my family to making them all face the consequences of their years of neglect. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand just how deep this rabbit hole goes. I was 12 when my parents adopted my younger sister Emma. She was 10, blonde, bubbly, and everything I apparently wasn't. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't some bitter kid who hated having a sister. I was actually excited. I'd been an only child for 12 years, and the thought of having someone to share secrets with, to play with, to have movie nights and sister talks with, it filled me with this warm anticipation. But from the moment Emma walked through our front door, clutching her teddy bear and looking up at my parents with those big blue eyes, I became invisible. Not slowly, not gradually, instantly. Like someone had flipped a switch, and suddenly I was broadcasting on a frequency nobody could hear anymore. It started small, the way these things always do. My mom would ask Emma what she wanted for breakfast. Spend 10 minutes discussing the perfect combination of syrup and butter for her pancakes, then slide a bowl of cereal across the counter to me without even looking up. Dad would come home from work and immediately ask Emma about her day, listening intently as she described every detail of her art class or playground adventures. When he finally turned to me, it was always with this distracted half-smile and a generic "How was school, honey?" before his attention drifted back to Emma's animated stories. At first I told myself it was just an adjustment period. She was new, she needed extra attention. She was still getting used to having a family. I could be patient, I could wait my turn, but my turn never came. Emma got the bigger bedroom because she needed space for all her new things. I got moved to the smaller room that used to be Dad's office, complete with his old desk pushed against one wall and boxers of his college textbooks stacked in the corner. When I mentioned that maybe we could redecorate, make it feel more like my space, Mom said we'd get to it eventually, but eventually never arrived. The family photos started changing too. The mantelpiece that used to display pictures of me throughout the years, from gap-toothed kindergarten portraits to middle school graduation, slowly filled with images of Emma. Emma at the zoo. Emma learning to ride the bike that used to be mine. Emma opening Christmas presents. I was still in some of the pictures, but I was always in the background, slightly out of focus, like an afterthought. High school was when things really went downhill. I'd joined the debate team, and I was actually good at it, like really good. I had this natural ability to research arguments, to think on my feet, to articulate complex ideas in ways that made people listen. We were preparing for the state championship, and I was selected as our team's primary speaker for the final round. It was the biggest thing that had ever happened to me academically. The championship was on a Saturday in April. I'd been talking about it for months, reminding my parents about the date, asking them to put it on the calendar. They nodded and smiled and said of course they'd be there. But that same Saturday morning, Emma decided she wanted to try out for the community theater's production of Annie. The auditions were walk-ins, completely unplanned, and suddenly my parents were scrambling to get her there. "Sarah, honey, we'll try to make it to your debate thing after Emma's audition," Mom said, barely looking up from where she was helping Emma practice her lines. "It's not a debate thing, Mom. It's the state championship. I'm the primary speaker for our team. Of course, sweetheart, we know how important it is to you, but they didn't show up. They didn't show up, and we won. We actually won the state championship." And I stood on that stage holding our trophy, scanning the audience for my parents' faces, and they weren't there. Do you know what that feels like? To achieve something you've worked toward for 4 years, something that should be one of the proudest moments of your teenage life, and have nobody there who matters to you. I called them afterward, voice shaking with excitement and hurt. "Mom, we won. We won the whole thing. That's wonderful, honey. Emma got the lead role in Annie. Can you believe it? Our little star. Our little star. Not our daughters. Not we're proud of both of you. Emma was the star, and I was just ... Their college applications were another nightmare. I'd worked my butt off to maintain a 4.2 GPA. I had my debate achievements, volunteer work at the animal shelter, a part-time job at the local bookstore. I was applying to some really competitive schools, and I was stressed about essays and interviews and financial aid forms. When I tried to talk to my parents about it, Dad would nod absently and say, "I'm sure you'll figure it out, kiddo. You're smart." Meanwhile, Emma was getting private voice lessons, acting, coaching, and professional headshots for her theater pursuits. When she mentioned wanting to look at performing arts schools, both my parents immediately started researching programs, setting up campus visits, talking to admissions counselors. The difference in investment was so stark, it actually took my breath away. I got into Northwestern University with a partial scholarship. It was a huge deal, exactly the kind of achievement that should have made my parents burst with pride. I remember walking into the kitchen, acceptance letter in hand, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mom, Dad, I got in. I got into Northwestern, and they're giving me a scholarship." Mom looked up from where she was helping Emma with her algebra homework. "That's nice, dear. Did you see that Emma got the lead in the spring musical too? That's nice, dear." For words that summarized 8 years of my achievements, my struggles, my entire existence in that house. But here's where the story takes a turn. And I need you to really listen to this part, because this is where I learned something crucial about myself and about life. That first semester at Northwestern, I was lost. I'd spent so many years trying to get my parents' attention, trying to make them see me, that I'd never really figured out who I was when nobody was watching. I was like a plant that had been growing toward a light source that kept moving, and suddenly I was in a room with no windows, completely in the dark about which direction to grow. I struggled academically for the first time in my life, not because the work was too hard, but because I couldn't figure out why I was doing it. Who was I trying to impress? What was I trying to prove? My parents barely called, and when they did, the conversations lasted about 5 minutes before they'd say they had to go help Emma with something. I hit rock bottom around November of my freshman year. I was sitting in my dorm room, looking at a failed economics midterm, feeling completely disconnected from everything and everyone around me. My roommate was out at some party, and I was alone with this crushing realization that she moved back home and was working at a local restaurant, while trying to figure out her next steps. I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern and got offered a position at a major newspaper in New York. I was 22, about to start my dream job in the city I'd always wanted to live in, and I felt like I was finally becoming the person I was meant to be. But here's where the story gets complicated. And I want you to stick with me because this is important. Success, real success, the kind that comes from authenticity rather than desperation, it changes you. It gives you perspective. It also gives you power. I'd been in New York for about 6 months when I got a call from my dad. Not a casual check-in call, not a "how are you doing" call, but a panicked, desperate call. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk to you about something important." Suddenly, I was honey again. Suddenly they needed to talk to me. It turned out that my parents had made some seriously poor financial decisions over the years. All those voice lessons, acting coaches, private schools, and theater programs for Emma had been funded by credit cards and loans they couldn't really afford. Dad's business had been struggling for years, but they'd kept up appearances by borrowing against their home equity. Now Emma was back home, with no clear career path. They had massive debt, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. "We know we haven't been the best parents to you," Dad said, and I could hear him crying. "We know we let you down, and we're sorry. But you're doing so well now, and we're desperate. We don't know who else to turn to." They wanted me to co-sign on a loan to save their house. They wanted me to use my good credit, my financial stability, my success, to bail them out of the mess they'd created while ignoring me for nearly a decade. I sat in my tiny studio apartment in Queens, looking out at the city lights, and I felt this strange calm wash over me. For the first time in my entire relationship with my parents, I had something they needed. For the first time, I held the power. "Dad," I said quietly, "do you remember my state championship in high school?" There was a long pause. "Your what?" "The debate championship, when I was 17. The thing I'd been working toward for 4 years. The thing I reminded you about for months." Another pause. Longer this time. "Sarah, we were at Emma's audition that day. Do you remember what you said when I told you we won?" Silence. "You said, 'That's nice, dear,' and then immediately started talking about Emma getting a part in a community theater production. Do you remember that, Sarah? We're really in trouble here." This isn't the time to what, Dad? To talk about how you treated me. To acknowledge that you spent 8 years of my life making me feel like I didn't matter. You're right. This probably isn't the time. But it's the only time you've called me in 6 months, so it's the time we've got. I could hear my mom in the background, whispering urgently to my dad. We're sorry, he said finally. We know we made mistakes. We know we weren't fair to you. But we're family, Sarah. Family helps family. And that's when I said the words that had been building inside me for years. You're absolutely right, Dad. Family does help family. Family shows up for each other. Family celebrates each other's successes. Family sees each other, really sees each other, even when it's not convenient or easy. So, let me ask you something. When exactly did you start treating me like family? The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long, I thought we'd been disconnected, because from where I'm sitting, I continued, it seems like you're asking me to be the daughter you never had, to solve problems you created while ignoring the daughter you did have. Now, I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone who hurt you came asking for help? Have you ever had to decide between revenge and forgiveness? Between protecting yourself and helping someone who never helped you? Drop a comment and let me know, because what happened next is something I'm still processing myself. I didn't hang up on them. I didn't scream or yell or tell them exactly what I thought about their 8 years of neglect. Instead, I said something that surprised even me. I'll think about it. And I did think about it. For weeks, I wrestled with the decision. Part of me wanted to tell them exactly where they could put their loan application. Part of me wanted to make them feel as helpless and invisible as they'd made me feel for so many years. But there was another part of me, a part that had grown stronger during my years of independence, that recognized something important. My power didn't come from their approval anymore, and it didn't need to come from their suffering either. I called them back 3 weeks later, but what I said isn't what you might expect, and it's not what they expected either. I'll help you, I said, but not the way you asked. I didn't co-sign their loan. I didn't bail them out of their financial mess. Instead, I paid for 3 months of family therapy sessions, not couples therapy, not financial counseling, but family therapy. All of us together, sitting in a room with a professional who could help us talk about the years of dysfunction and neglect that had brought us to this point. I don't understand, my mom said. How is therapy going to save our house? It's not, I replied, but it might save our family. And honestly, I'm not sure which one of those things is more important to me right now. They were desperate enough to agree. Those 3 months of therapy were some of the most difficult and enlightening experiences of my life. Hearing my parents finally acknowledge out loud, with a witness, how differently they'd treated Emma and me was simultaneously validating and heartbreaking. Watching Emma realize that she'd been given advantages she'd never recognized, and seeing how that knowledge affected her, was complicated in ways I hadn't expected. But the most important thing that happened in those sessions was that I finally got to say everything I'd kept inside for years. Every missed event, every dismissive comment, every moment when I'd felt invisible, I laid it all out. Not to hurt them, but to help them understand the full scope of what their neglect had cost. And my parents listened, really listened. Maybe, for the first time in my life, by the end of the 3 months, something had shifted between us. Not fixed, not healed completely, but shifted. We were finally talking to each other, instead of past each other. They still lost the house. Their financial problems were too deep for therapy to solve, and honestly, that wasn't my responsibility to fix. They moved into a smaller apartment. Emma got a full-time job and started contributing to household expenses, and my dad had to close his business and take a position working for someone else. But here's the thing that might surprise you. We started having a relationship, a real one, based on who we actually were, rather than who they'd wanted Emma to be, or who I'd thought I needed to be to earn their love. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when old patterns would emerge, when Emma would get more attention, or when my achievements would be overshadowed by her struggles. But now we could talk about it. Now there was acknowledgement, awareness, effort to do better. Emma and I developed a relationship too, separate from our parents. She'd been carrying guilt about the preferential treatment she'd received. Guilt she'd never been able to articulate because she'd never fully understood the dynamic. We had some hard conversations, some tears, some anger, but we worked through it. The most unexpected outcome was that Emma decided to go back to school, but not for performing arts. She enrolled in a social work program, saying that our family therapy experience had shown her how much she wanted to help other families navigate difficult relationships and communication problems. That's for me. I'm 30 now. I've been promoted twice at the newspaper. I've won several journalism awards, and I recently got engaged to an amazing man who sees me, really sees me, from day one. My parents were at my engagement party, and for the first time in my life, I felt like they were genuinely proud of me, not because I was achieving something that reflected well on them, but because I was happy. But the real victory, the thing that took me years to understand, wasn't making them pay for their neglect. It wasn't revenge or punishment or even forcing them to acknowledge what they'd done wrong. The real victory was learning that my worth wasn't dependent on their recognition. The real victory was building a life so full and meaningful that their approval became nice to have rather than desperately needed. I still think about those 8 years sometimes, about the girl who stood invisible in her own family, trying so hard to be seen. I feel sad for her, but I'm also grateful to her, because her struggle taught me something invaluable. The people who are meant to love you will see you without you having to perform for their attention, and the people who can't see you, even when you're standing right in front of them screaming, they're not your audience. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're the invisible child, the overlooked sibling, the one who's been trying to earn love that should be freely given, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by other people's inability to see it. Your value doesn't decrease because someone else can't recognize it. You are not invisible just because some people choose not to look. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't making them pay. Sometimes it's refusing to keep paying the emotional cost of trying to collect love from people who are emotionally bankrupt. The family that ignored me for years didn't pay dearly in the end because I punished them. They paid dearly because they almost lost something irreplaceable, the chance to have a real relationship with me. They paid dearly because they had to face the consequences of their choices, and those consequences included nearly losing a daughter who had grown into someone they could have been proud of all along, if they'd just bothered to look. But the most expensive thing they paid, the years we lost, the memories we could have made, the relationship we could have had if they'd chosen to see me from the beginning. That's a price that can never be fully repaid. But it's also a price that taught all of us something about the value of the time we have left. Thanks for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've been the invisible one in your family or your friend group or your workplace, share your story in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we're not alone in feeling unseen. And remember, being overlooked by the wrong people is often the first step toward being truly valued by the right ones.